Imagine you are strolling along a beach on an otherwise ordinary day. You kick at a loose pebble, sending it skittering across the sand. It lands with a dull thud, nothing more than a small, unremarkable stone. You find yourself transported back 600 million years ago, to an epoch shrouded in enigma even today. What manner of creatures could have possibly inhabited this strange realm? What wonders and horrors might have lurked in those shadowy depths? And what secrets does this enigmatic era hold about the dawn of complex life on Earth? Prepare to be amazed as we delve into the fascinating world of the Ediacaran. The enigmatic organisms, with their delicate, often frond-like structures, may have thrived for eons, but their reign was not destined to last. Prepare to witness the Ediacaran's eventual decline, a mystery that continues to baffle scientists. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories of our planet's incredible past. Was it a gradual fading or a sudden cataclysm? Uncover the theories and evidence surrounding their disappearance and contemplate the factors that may have led to their demise. Yet, if you were to peer closely, really closely, into the heart of that pebble, you would find yourself gazing upon a world unimaginably alien, a world both wondrous and terrifying. Its impact reverberates through time, shaping the trajectory of evolution and leaving an indelible mark on our planet's history. As you reflect on the profound significance of this era, consider the lessons it holds for us today. In the ebb and flow of life, in the delicate balance of ecosystems, the Ediacaran reminds us of the interconnectedness of all living things and the importance of preserving the biodiversity that makes our planet so unique. For nestled within its unassuming form, this pebble holds the key to one of the greatest mysteries in the history of life, the enigmatic world of the Ediacaran. As you venture deeper, time itself seems to slip away. These pioneering species, equipped with specialized tissues and organs, represent an evolutionary leap of staggering proportions. Their appearance heralds a new era of biodiversity, paving the way for the astonishing array of life that would grace our planet in the millennia to come. Here, the oceans teem with otherworldly creatures unlike anything alive today. These enigmatic organisms, the earliest known complex animals, captivate our imagination with their bizarre forms and lifestyles. But who or what were they? What were these pioneers of the animal kingdom like? How did they survive, and what role did they play in shaping the world around them? Join us as we unravel the mysteries surrounding these fascinating creatures and explore their significance in the grand narrative of life on Earth. The Ediacaran period marks a pivotal chapter in the history of our planet, setting the stage for the remarkable transformations that would follow. As you continue your journey through the layers of time, prepare to witness firsthand the profound impact of these enigmatic creatures on the course of evolution. Discover how their presence laid the groundwork for the flourishing of life that would soon transform Earth into a vibrant ecosystem. But the story doesn't end there. The Ediacaran also witnessed the emergence of the first multicellular organisms, marking a crucial step in the development of complex life. As you delve deeper into this captivating period, you'll encounter another facet of the Ediacaran, a stark reminder of the impermanence of life. The Ediacaran's legacy lives on, influencing the very essence of life on Earth. Now let's move on to the next chapter in our incredible journey through Earth's geological history. Our story begins 600 million years ago, a time so remote that the word prehistoric seems almost quaint. In the grand sweep of Earth's history, this was the dawn of a new era. The Ediacaran period was in full swing, named after the remarkable fossils found in the Ediacaran Mountains of Australia. Our planet was a world of extremes. Above the waterline, silence reigned supreme. Imagine standing on a bare rock, wind whipping across your face, rain hammering against your skin. Their photosynthetic activity was changing the very composition of the atmosphere. The Great Oxidation Event was reaching its crescendo, as more and more oxygen accumulated in the sky. The sun's ultraviolet radiation began to be filtered out, creating a protective shield, the ozone layer. The peaceful world of these soft-bodied giants was about to be shattered by an explosion of evolutionary creativity that would make the Ediacaran biota look like a gentle prelude to the main event. So join us next time as we explore the dawn of the Paleozoic era and the emergence of creatures that would captivate our imagination. The sterilizing effect of UV radiation was reduced and life on land could finally take root, albeit in a form that we wouldn't recognize. That was the experience of being alive on land at the time. Volcanoes erupted with tremendous force, spewing gases and ash that would alter the climate for millions of years. The very foundations of the Earth were shifting, setting the stage for the most dramatic evolutionary event in the history of life. There was not a single tree, not a bird, not a creature of any kind to break the monotony of wind and wave. It was not the peaceful quiet of a forest clearing, but the eerie, absolute silence of a world waiting to be born. But while the land was harsh and unforgiving, the oceans teemed with life. The Ediacaran biota, a diverse array of soft-bodied organisms that had evolved into some truly bizarre forms. Take Dickinsonia, for example, a creature that looked like a quilted mattress come to life. Picture a squishy, oval-shaped blob, vaguely heart-shaped with a series of parallel grooves running along its length. It grew up to 4 feet across, sliding across the seafloor like a gastropod, a living carpet grazing on bacterial mats. It absorbed nutrients directly through its skin, a process known as cutaneous respiration. Dickinsonia had no mouth, no eyes, no obvious way of feeding or sensing its surroundings. Yet it thrived in this alien ecosystem. Then there was Charnia. Unlike Dickinsonia, Charnia was rooted in place. It rose from the ocean floor like an ancient fern, its fronds swaying in currents that carried no fish, no swimming predators. Charnia was a sessile organism, anchored to the seafloor by a central trunk from which its leaf-like appendages extended. It used these fronds to filter feed, capturing particles suspended in the water column. Life in the Ediacaran oceans was peaceful. There were no predators to speak of, no creatures capable of hunting and killing their own kind. The concept of eat or be eaten simply didn't exist. These organisms lived in a kind of biological utopia, sharing resources and seemingly unthreatened by their environment. But this tranquility was not to last. Deep in the ocean, cyanobacteria had been working for billions of years, quietly pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, the Earth's geography was also changing. Continental drift was shifting the continents, bringing new landmasses together and pushing others apart. As the Ediacaran period drew to a close, the stage was set for something unprecedented. When we think of prehistoric life, it can seem like nothing more than a few dinosaurs stomping around. But the truth is that life on Earth has been incredibly diverse throughout history. And one moment in time stands out above the rest as the weirdest, most wonderful time to be alive: the Cambrian explosion. These arthropods, with their segmented bodies and compound eyes, were among the first animals to see the world clearly. Creatures began developing armor, spines, and defensive strategies that would make a medieval knight jealous. Well, the truth is that even though scientists have been studying the Cambrian explosion for decades, they don't have all the answers. One leading theory is that the increased oxygen levels in the oceans allowed for the evolution of larger, more active animals. Click here to watch more fun science and tech stories. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to keep on thinking. Another theory suggests that a genetic toolkit allowed for the rapid evolution of new forms of life. Whatever the cause, the effect was nothing short of spectacular. The Cambrian explosion saw the emergence of nearly every major group of animals alive today, from the ancestors of spiders and crustaceans to the predecessors of fish, and yes, even the ancestors of humans. It was as if life itself had suddenly been unleashed, exploring every possibility in a grand experiment. The first shells appeared, calcium carbonate fortresses that could withstand the crushing forces of powerful jaws. As the period drew to a close, many of the most bizarre creatures began to disappear. The first great extinction event of the animal kingdom was approaching, and only the fittest designs would survive to tell the tale. Yet the legacy of the Cambrian endured, a reminder that in the grand theater of evolution, the plot thickens. Some animals burrowed deep into the seafloor, creating the first underground cities. Others developed toxic spines or learned to hide in the shadows of coral reefs. And what reefs they were! The first complex reef systems were being built by creatures called archaeoceathids, strange, sponge-like animals that created towering structures on the seafloor. These reefs became the first apartment complexes of the animal kingdom, providing shelter for countless species in a world suddenly filled with danger. But perhaps the most extraordinary creature of the Cambrian was Amphibians, a five-eyed anomaly with a long proboscis tipped with a grasping claw. It looked like something designed by a committee of alien engineers. Too strange to be real. Yet, there it was, swimming through Cambrian waters with a peculiar grace that defied explanation. Imagine thousands of tiny lenses working together, creating a mosaic view of the seafloor. They scuttled across the bottom of ancient oceans like living fossils, their hard shells protecting them from the new reality of predation. But the trilobites were not alone. The Cambrian seas were about to meet their first superpredator. Anomalocaris, the abnormal shrimp, ruled these ancient waters like a monster from our deepest nightmares. 6 feet long, with grasping arms that could snatch prey from the water column, and eyes the size of dinner plates. This creature was evolution's first attempt at creating the perfect killing machine. Its flexible body undulated through the water with terrifying grace. And its circular mouth, lined with sharp teeth, could crush the shells of any creature unfortunate enough to be caught in its grip. This was the birth of the ecosystem as we know it, an ecosystem built on conflict, competition, and the constant struggle between predator and prey. The age of innocence was over. The age of survival had begun. So buckle up, because we're going back 500 million years to find out what really happened when life on Earth exploded. And then it happened. In what geologists call the blink of an eye, a mere 25 million years life exploded into forms so diverse, so complex, so utterly revolutionary that this event has been called the Cambrian explosion. It was as if nature had suddenly discovered the blueprints for every major group of animals that would ever exist. The peaceful world of the Ediacaran was gone forever. In its place arose an arms race of staggering proportions, where innovation meant survival, and survival meant war. This was the dawn of the new era, the age of survival. Enter the trilobites, the miniature tanks of the Cambrian seas. The response to this new reality was immediate and dramatic. So why did this explosion of life happen? But like all great parties, the Cambrian explosion couldn't last forever. Now it's time for you to help us write the next chapter. Today we're diving into the remarkable world of the Ordovician period, a time when life on Earth was truly beginning to flourish. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming episodes. The Ordovician dawned on a world transformed. The experimental chaos of the Cambrian had given way to something more refined, more organized, a world where life had learned the rules of the game and was playing it with increasing sophistication. Others grew eyes on stalks that could rotate independently, giving them a 360-degree view of their world. They filtered nutrients from the water with such efficiency that they could support entire ecosystems. Their shells, when they died, accumulated in layers hundreds of feet thick, creating limestone deposits that we can still see today. The crinoids, sea lilies, created underwater gardens of stunning beauty. These weren't plants, but animals that had learned to live like flowers. Volcanic activity was pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, while at the same time, the formation of the Appalachian Mountains was removing carbon dioxide from the air. sea levels plummeted by over 400 feet. The warm, shallow seas that had supported such incredible diversity suddenly became cold, deep, and hostile. The great reef systems collapsed. The diverse communities of the continental shelves found themselves stranded in deep water, unable to survive the sudden environmental change. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your fellow Earth enthusiasts. Your support means the world to us, so keep watching as we continue to unlock the secrets of our planet's ancient past. 85% of all marine species vanished from the fossil record. Entire groups of animals that had dominated the Ordovician seas for millions of years simply disappeared forever. The trilobites, though they survived, were decimated. The great orthocones became extinct. The stage was being set for one of the most dramatic climate shifts in Earth's history. The warm, stable climate of the Ordovician was about to give way to a catastrophic ice age that would test the resilience of every living thing on the planet. Their graceful stalks swayed in the currents, their feathery arms filtering microscopic food from the water. When they died, their skeletal plates scattered across the seafloor, creating limestone beds that geologists call crinoid gardens. The survivors of the Ordovician extinction were tough, adaptable, and ready to rebuild. They carried with them the lessons learned from 40 million years of marine sophistication, and they were about to use those lessons to colonize an entirely new frontier, the land itself. The largest trilobites reached lengths of over 2 feet, their segmented bodies undulating across the seafloor like prehistoric submarines. Picture a squid trapped in a cone-shaped shell with tentacles extending from the opening like the arms of a kraken. These were the apex predators of the Ordovician seas, jet propelling themselves through the water with such speed and force that they could ram their prey with bone-crushing impact. It was an era when the oceans were a brilliant blue, so deep and pristine that light danced in its depths. The first jawless fish, primitive creatures called ostracoderms, swam through these ancient seas with their sucker-like mouths and armor-plated heads. They were small, humble creatures, but they carried within their bodies the blueprint for every vertebrate that would ever exist. The Ordovician seas were also home to the first true starfish, creatures that brought a new kind of predation to the seafloor. They could pry open the shells of brachiopods and mollusks with their powerful arms, turning the protected interiors of these creatures into accessible meals. This wasn't the murky, chaotic world of the Cambrian. This was the age of the Great Reefs. Simple plants, little more than green films, began to colonize the edges of pools and streams. They were nothing like the complex plants we know today, but they were writing the first chapters of the story that would eventually lead to forests, flowers, and the oxygen-rich atmosphere we breathe today. Not the coral reefs we know today, but magnificent structures built by rugose and tabulate corals. Creatures that looked like living flowers, but were actually sophisticated colonial animals. These reefs stretched for hundreds of miles, creating the first true underwater cities. They rose from the seafloor like underwater mountains, their surfaces carpeted with a diversity of life that would make a modern tropical reef seem sparse by comparison. The oceans of the Ordovician were unlike anything our planet has seen since. They were deeper, clearer, and more vibrant than the murky seas of the Cambrian. The water itself seemed to pulse with life from the sunlit shallows to the mysterious depths where strange creatures moved through eternal twilight. Imagine clear, deep waters teeming with life, sunlight penetrating the depths, illuminating a world of wonder. Among these reef communities, the trilobites had evolved into forms of breathtaking beauty and complexity. Some developed elaborate spines that made them look like underwater porcupines. But the real architects of the Ordovician seas were the brachiopods, shell-bearing creatures that carpeted the seafloor in vast beds. And then there were the orthocones, straight-shelled cephalopods that could grow to lengths of over 30 feet. For the first time in Earth's history, vertebrates were beginning to make their presence known. Meanwhile, on land, the first tentative steps toward terrestrial life were being taken. But the Ordovician world was living on borrowed time. The continents were drifting inexorably toward the South Pole, and the climate was becoming increasingly unstable. When the Ice Age struck, it struck with devastating force. The age of ancient seas was over, but life, as it always does, found a way. After the mass extinction at the end of the Ordovician, the oceans were a very different place. Life began to creep back into the empty ecological spaces, but nothing was the same. Now, exactly what caused this event is uncertain, but we know that it wiped out roughly 85% of all marine species and left the oceans feeling pretty empty. This event cleared the way for a group of fish called the placoderms to dominate the seas. Placoderms were an incredibly diverse group of fish that lived from the Devonian until the end of the Permian. And while they are often grouped together, they were actually a very diverse bunch. They had bony armor, which makes sense considering that many of them are called placoderms. But some were only armored as juveniles and lost their armor as adults. Others were only armored partially, with the head armor separated from the rest of the body armor. Still others were completely covered in armor. Some were huge, reaching lengths of over 6 meters. And some were relatively small, maxing out at around half a meter long. They were apex predators, efficient swimmers, bottom feeders, scavengers, and everything in between. They were also incredibly successful, dominating the oceans for hundreds of millions of years. And you can blame it all on their jaws. The evolution of jaws was a major milestone in the evolution of vertebrates, and it happened sometime after the Ordovician mass extinction and before the beginning of the Devonian. It seems likely that jaws evolved independently in two groups of fish, the placoderms and the more shark-like fishes. We don't know exactly how natural selection shaped these guys' jaws, but we do have a good idea of what they were made of. Many jawed fish have teeth that are modified scales, while the upper jaw may have evolved from skeletal elements called dermatomandibules, which are associated with the sense of smell. Regardless of the details, the evolution of jaws allowed fish to capture prey more efficiently and opened up new possibilities for feeding. Some fish developed teeth specialized for crushing, others for slicing. Some developed jaws for manipulating objects, and some even developed jaws capable of producing sound. This increased efficiency meant that fish could grow larger. They could support bigger brains and become active hunters rather than passive filter feeders. In short, the evolution of jaws kicked off an ecological and evolutionary revolution. Placoderms were among the first vertebrates to take advantage of the opportunities created by jaws. They used theirs for crushing the shells of brachiopods and mollusks, tearing apart the carcasses of dead arthropods, and even, in the case of one genus, producing suction-like sounds to capture slippery prey. Their success was staggering. Fossils of placoderms show that they were extremely diverse by the beginning of the Devonian. Some were apex predators. Some were too large to be eaten by anything except other placoderms. And some had developed specializations for finding and exploiting small prey in new habitats like coral reefs. The oldest known placoderm fossils come from the very beginning of the Silurian. So they clearly had a big role to play in the recovery of the oceans following the mass extinction at the end of the Ordovician. And they passed on their innovations to the next generation of fish, especially to the group that would eventually give rise to sharks, rays, and bony fish. By the end of the Silurian, jawed fish were found across the globe. They were diverse in size, shape, and ecological role. And they had begun to conquer the land. Tetrapods, the four-footed vertebrates, were probably tetrapods, or four-footed vertebrates. Were probably the first tetrapods to crawl up on land, although this transition is still debated by paleontologists. Either way, these vertebrates inherited the jawed fish's adaptations and used them to make a life on land. But life on land wasn't easy. There wasn't much oxygen to go around, and getting around required substantial limbs. So these early tetrapods were likely better suited for crawling through moist environments than for walking across dry land. These fish also inherited the fish's highly developed lateral line system, which uses sensory receptors to detect vibrations in the surrounding medium. But as they began to spend more and more time on land, they probably began to rely less on the lateral line and more on their ears to hear sounds and their eyes to see potential mates and predators. These adaptations were key to the eventual conquest of the land by tetrapods. By the end of the Silurian, jawed fish and their relatives had colonized almost every habitat on Earth. They were adapted for different modes of locomotion. Some could slither, some could crawl, some could walk, some could run, and some were even adapted for jumping. While the exact relationships among these early tetrapods is still debated, it's clear that they were the ancestors of all the tetrapods that came after, including amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and, of course, us. The Silurian was a period of profound change, but change wasn't limited to the oceans. Life on land was undergoing a revolution of its own. Plants and animals were becoming larger and more complex, and new types of organisms were appearing in the fossil record. Fossils from the Silurian tell us that vascular plants appeared sometime before the end of the period. Unlike their predecessors, these plants had tissues that allowed for the long-distance transport of water and nutrients. That meant they didn't have to stay small or grow close to water. They could grow tall and spread far away from streams and lakes. These early vascular plants are unknown, but their descendants would eventually include ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. And without these plants, the animals that ate them wouldn't have been able to evolve either. The earliest known vascular land plants were probably rooted in moist areas near water. But they probably grew taller than any plant that had come before them. They may have even grown into small shrubs or trees. These early plants had leaves that unfurled in a way that maximized exposure to sunlight. They probably reproduced via spores rather than seeds, and they lacked the extensive root systems of later plants. But they were an important step in the evolution of terrestrial life. These early vascular plants paved the way for more complex plants and more complex animals. Without them, the land would have remained a barren desert, lifeless and hostile. And if that had been the case, our story might have ended right there. And one lineage of animals, the jawed fish, were about to transform life on Earth forever. Hi, it's me, and welcome to Paleologic. So at the end of the Ordovician, 443 million years ago, there was a mass extinction. As the curtain rose on the Devonian period, our planet was poised for a dramatic transformation. In the span of some 25 million years, Earth would go from being a world lightly populated by humble plants and animals to one teeming with complex life forms. Forests would rise and fall. Fish would conquer the land. Giant insects would buzz through the skies. All this and more would occur during the Devonian, which lasted from about 419 to 359 million years ago. This allowed them to grow taller, much, much taller. The first vascular plants were the ancestors of today's ferns and the closest relatives of the earliest forest giants. The lycophytes were also spore-bearing plants, but they grew in a completely different form. The trunks of the scale trees were made of tightly packed, scale-like leaves, giving them the appearance of giant asparagus spears. Their trunks were also marked with diamond-shaped patterns that represented where leaves had once been attached. These patterns are thought to have helped the plants capture more sunlight, but they also made the trees look like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Together, the cladoxolipsids and lycopods created cathedral-like spaces beneath. Their canopies were shadows played across the forest floor for the first time in Earth's history. As they spread across the land, they captured carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as the plants photosynthesized. They pumped oxygen into the atmosphere at unprecedented rates. Join us next time as we continue to explore the amazing world of the Devonian. See you then. They were altering the chemistry of the planet and creating something that had never existed before: soil. As the forest giants lived and died, their remains mixed with weathered rock and the waste products of the first terrestrial animals to create a thin layer of living, breathing. skin between the rocky interior of the planet and the oxygen-filled atmosphere above, and released oxygen, transforming the chemistry of the planet and paving the way for more complex life to evolve. The story of the Devonian is ultimately a story of life conquering new frontiers, of creatures adapting to previously unthinkably harsh environments, of entire ecosystems springing into being almost overnight. Let's dive right into the thick of it. When the Devonian dawned, the Silurian had just ended, and the world was still dominated by tiny, non-vascular plants. There were a few taller plants around, but they were more like today's mosses and ferns than the towering trees that would soon dominate the horizon. These plants looked like gigantic versions of today's whisk ferns, but they grew over 100 feet tall. The plants that make up today's forests reproduced with seeds, but the early forest giants reproduced with spores. Spores are like seeds, but they don't have protective coats or the ability to develop into seedlings independent of water. This meant that the early forests needed to stay close to water, but they quickly dominated every available wetland. Yet in the span of a few million years, these simple plants would give way to something unprecedented in Earth's history: the first forests. It all started with the first vascular plants. Unlike the mosses and algae that had dominated before them, vascular plants had specialized tissues for transporting water and nutrients. And then came the big ones, the tree-like organisms known as cladoxylopsids. Alongside the cladoxylopsids grew the first lycophytes, the ancestors of today's club mosses and spike mosses. But the true revolutionaries of the Devonian forests were almost invisible to the naked eye. And that's a wrap for part 1 of this series. When you hear the word dinosaur, what kind of animal do you imagine? Huge, terrifying, fire, and forget about breathing underwater. You need air. The oxygen levels in the atmosphere had reached a staggering 35%, nearly twice what we breathe today. This oxygen-rich air created a world where life could grow to sizes that seem impossible by modern standards. The skies above the Carboniferous swamps were dominated by insects of nightmare proportions. But the real stars of the Carboniferous were the amphibians. These creatures looked superficially similar to their amphibian cousins, but they carried within their bodies a revolutionary innovation that would change the course of life on Earth. The reptilian egg was a marvel of biological engineering, and every other land vertebrate that would follow. The Carboniferous had been a time of giants, of oxygen-rich skies, a vast forest that stretched from horizon to horizon. But it was also a time of transition, a bridge between the age of amphibians and the age of reptiles. As the period drew to a close, the world was preparing for its next great transformation. Encased in a leathery shell, it contained its own water supply, its own waste disposal system, and its own food source. For the first time in the history of vertebrate life, reproduction was completely independent of water. The land was finally, truly conquered. These creatures had exploded into forms of stunning diversity and size. Some, like Eriaps, were the size of small cars, their massive heads armed with teeth that could crush the shells of any prey. Others, like Diplocalus, had developed bizarre boomerang-shaped heads that may have helped them glide through the water like living hydrofoils. The amphibians ruled the Carboniferous world, but they were living on borrowed time. Their life cycle still depended on water. They had to return to ponds and streams to lay their eggs, and their young went through an aquatic tadpole stage before metamorphosing into terrestrial adults. But evolution was working on a solution. Dragonflies with wingspans over 2 feet patrolled the airways like prehistoric helicopters, their massive eyes scanning the landscape for prey. These were just scaled-up versions of modern dragonflies. They were sophisticated predators, capable of snatching small amphibians right off the ground. They could lay their eggs anywhere, in the heart of the forests, on dry hillsides, even in desert conditions. They were no longer tied to the water's edge, and this freedom would eventually allow them to colonize every habitat on Earth. As the Carboniferous period progressed, the climate began to change. The vast swamps that had dominated the early Carboniferous were beginning to dry up as the continents drifted toward each other, forming the supercontinent Pangaea. The humid, stable climate that had supported the giant amphibians was giving way to more seasonal, variable conditions. The stage was being set for the next great transition in Earth's history. The age of amphibians was ending, and the age of reptiles was about to begin. In order for dinosaurs to evolve, there needed to be a lot of oxygen in the air. If not, their big bodies would collapse like a house of cards. The trees reproduced by releasing millions of spores into the air, creating clouds of genetic material that drifted across the landscape like golden snow. When these spores landed in suitable conditions, they would germinate into tiny plants that would eventually give rise to the next generation of giants. Beneath the canopy, the first true forest's floors were developing. Ferns carpeted the ground in green tapestries, their fronds creating a humid, cathedral-like atmosphere. The air was thick with moisture and rich with the scent of decomposing vegetation. So, how did our atmosphere get so toasty? It started 359 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. Step into the Carboniferous world, and you would think you had wandered into an alien planet. On the forest floor, millipedes the size of automobiles munched their way through the leaf litter, their segmented bodies undulating through the undergrowth like living trains. Some reached the lengths of over 6 feet, their exoskeletons gleaming like armor in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy. But it was the forests themselves that defined the Carboniferous world. These weren't the diverse woodlands we know today, but vast, steamy swamps dominated by a few species of giant trees. The scaled trees had reached their evolutionary peak, growing to heights of over 150 feet with trunks 6 feet in diameter. When they died, they didn't decay. The swampy conditions preserved them, layer upon layer, creating the vast coal deposits that would eventually power the Industrial Revolution. The lycophyte forests created a unique ecosystem unlike anything that exists today. This was a world where life grew with exuberant abundance, where the very air seemed to pulse with vitality. Deep in the Carboniferous forests, the first true reptiles were making their appearance. The early reptiles were small, humble creatures, but they carried enormous potential. The creatures that would dominate the next phase of Earth's history were already present in the Carboniferous forests. Small, unassuming reptiles that would eventually give rise to dinosaurs, mammals, a world that was both magnificent and ominous. The continents had finally collided to form Pangaea, the last supercontinent our planet would ever see. Here the sun beat down mercilessly on red sandstone and salt flats, creating temperatures that would make modern deserts seem temperate by comparison. This wasn't a dinosaur, despite its fearsome appearance, but a synapsid more closely related to you and me than to any reptile. These were the first vertebrates to develop truly mammal-like features: differentiated teeth, complex jaw muscles, and possibly even primitive hair. The plant-eating synapsids were equally impressive. Scutosaurus was a massive herbivore, the size of a small car, its body covered in bony plates that made it look like a living tank. More importantly, they were pumping enormous quantities of toxic gases into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels began to rise, causing global warming on a scale that dwarfed anything in Earth's previous history. Hydrogen sulfide poisoned the atmosphere, creating acid rain that could dissolve limestone and kill vegetation. The very chemistry of the oceans began to change, becoming more acidic and less hospitable to life. The effects were gradual at first, but they were inexorable. Species that had thrived for millions of years began to disappear from the fossil record. The complex ecosystems that had taken tens of millions of years to develop began to collapse. The great diversity of the Permian world was being systematically destroyed by subsons changes that were beyond the ability of life to adapt to. The stage was being set for the greatest catastrophe in the history of life on Earth. The Permian Triassic extinction event, the Great Dying, was about to eliminate. over 90% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial species. It would be the closest that life has ever come to complete annihilation. But that story, my friends, is one for another day. These creatures had developed sophisticated mechanisms for processing tough plant material, including complex tooth arrangements and powerful jaw muscles that could crush even the hardest vegetation. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Permian life was the complexity of the ecosystems, for the first time in Earth's history. Terrestrial food webs had developed the intricate relationships that we associate with modern ecosystems. There were primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and apex predators, all interacting in ways that created stable, sustainable communities. Its sail was a marvel of biological engineering, a solar panel that could absorb heat from the sun in the morning. These were the first trees to produce seeds instead of spores, giving them a crucial advantage in the increasingly arid climate. They could reproduce without water, could survive in harsh conditions, and could colonize habitats that were unavailable to their spore-bearing predecessors. In the oceans, life was equally diverse. The last of the trilobites were making their final stand. Their elaborate forms, a testament to 270 million years of evolutionary success. The seas were filled with brachiopods, crinoids, and bryozoans that created reef systems of stunning complexity. The marine reptiles were beginning to make their presence known, with early forms that would eventually give rise to the mighty marine reptiles of the Mesozoic. But beneath this surface prosperity, something sinister was stirring. Deep in what is now Siberia, the largest volcanic event in Earth's history was beginning to unfold and release it into the atmosphere when the animal became too warm. Edaphosaurus, a plant-eating relative of Dimetrodon, had developed its own sail for thermoregulation. These weren't just random evolutionary experiments, but sophisticated adaptations to the extreme climate conditions of the Permian world. The sail allowed these animals to regulate their body temperature with a precision that gave them a crucial advantage in the harsh continental climate. As the Permian progressed, the synapsids evolved into forms of breathtaking diversity. Here, the lack of nearby oceans meant that there was no moderating influence on the climate. Summers were blazingly hot, winters were surprisingly cold, and the temperature swings were extreme. But around the margins of this supercontinent, where the monsoons could still bring seasonal rains, life flourished with a diversity that would make modern tropical ecosystems seem sparse by comparison. This was the world of the synapsids, the group of animals that would eventually give rise to mammals, but which in the Permian included some of the most spectacular creatures ever to walk the earth. This massive landmass stretched from pole to pole, creating climate patterns of unprecedented extremes. The interior of Pangaea was a vast desert, larger than any that exists today. Dimetrodon, with its magnificent sail-like back, was one of the most iconic predators of the early Permian. The gorgonopsids were saber-toothed predators that stalked the landscape like prehistoric tigers. Their massive canine teeth, capable of delivering killing bites to prey much larger than themselves. The Permian forests were dominated by a new type of plant, the conifers. The Siberian traps were not explosive volcanoes, but vast fissures in the Earth's crust that poured lava across an area the size of Europe. Okay, so the last time I talked about the Permian-Triassic extinction, I neglected to mention something kind of important, namely, what came after. So let's talk about that. In this episode, we'll explore the aftermath of the Great Dying and the rise of the dinosaurs. Let's start by setting the stage. Small synapsids, the ancestors of mammals, scurried through the undergrowth, their warm-blooded metabolism allowing them to remain active in the extreme conditions. The first dinosaurs appeared in the Middle Triassic, but they were nothing like the giants that would dominate the later Mesozoic. Eoraptor was about the size of a small dog, a bipedal predator that hunted small prey in the South American highlands. The dinosaurs were about to begin their 165 million-year reign as the dominant land animals. The marine reptiles were preparing to rule the oceans with a diversity and magnificence that has never been equaled. And in the skies, the pterosaurs were evolving into forms that would challenge our very conception of what it means to fly. The world had survived its greatest catastrophe and was about to enter its most spectacular age. The Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs, was about to begin. Herrerasaurus was larger, about the size of a modern wolf, but it was still a relatively minor player in Triassic ecosystems. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the channel. It really helps me to keep this content coming. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. I'll see you next time. The first dinosaurs succeeded not because they were the largest or most powerful predators, but because they were the most efficient. Their lightweight skeletons allowed them to move quickly and economically. Their advanced respiratory systems gave them more endurance than their competitors. Their upright posture reduced energy expenditure and allowed them to cover more ground in search of food. But the same could be said for the other archosaurs. The ancestors of crocodiles were more than holding their own, competing with the dinosaurs for limited resources. And then there were the protopterosaurs, the earliest vertebrates to evolve powered flight. The evolution of flight in pterosaurs was a masterpiece of biological engineering. Their wings were constructed from a membrane of skin and muscle stretched between an enormously elongated fourth finger and the body. This design was completely different from the feathered wings of birds or the skin membranes of bats, representing an independent solution to the problem of aerial locomotion. But their day in the sun was over. They would spend the next 180 million years as small, inconspicuous creatures, waiting for their chance to inherit the earth. The first ichthyosaurs appeared, reptiles that had returned to the sea and evolved into shapes that were remarkably similar to modern dolphins. The first plesiosaurs were developing the long necks and flippers that would make them the dominant marine predators of the Mesozoic. The Triassic was a time of experimentation, of evolutionary innovation on a scale that hadn't been seen since the Cambrian explosion. The empty ecological niches left by the Permian extinction were being filled by creatures that represented entirely new approaches to the problems of living. The age of reptiles was beginning in earnest, but the Triassic world was still unstable. The climate continued to fluctuate wildly, and the ecosystems were still in the process of recovery. Another extinction event at the end of the Triassic would eliminate many of the archosaur competitors of the dinosaurs, clearing the way for the age of dinosaurs that was to come. The real winners of the Triassic were the archosaurs, the group that would eventually give rise to dinosaurs, crocodiles, and pterosaurs. These reptiles had evolved a suite of adaptations that made them perfectly suited to the post-extinction world. Their metabolism was more efficient than that of their synapsid competitors. Their limbs were positioned directly beneath their bodies for more efficient locomotion, and their respiratory systems were more advanced, allowing them to extract oxygen from the thin, hot air more effectively. The world that emerged from the Permian Triassic extinction was a planet stripped of its former glory. The lush forests were gone, replaced by barren landscapes dotted with the occasional hardy survivor. The complex ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop had been reduced to simple food webs dominated by a few resilient species. But life, as it always does, found a way. The early Triassic world was harsh beyond imagination. The climate was hot and dry, with temperatures that regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit even at high latitudes. The atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide, creating a greenhouse effect that made the planet hotter than it had been at any time in the previous 100 million years. The few surviving plants were tough, drought-resistant species that could survive in conditions that would kill most modern vegetation. The seed ferns and early conifers dominated the landscape, their deep roots probing for water in the parched soil. The forests of the Permian had been replaced by scrublands and savannas, open habitats that would favor entirely different types of animals. The survivors of the Great Extinction were a motley crew of hardy generalists. But the dinosaurs were not alone in their conquest of the post-extinction world. In the oceans, the recovery was equally dramatic. The marine reptiles that had been present in small numbers during the Permian began to radiate into new forms. As the Triassic period drew to a close, the stage was set for one of the most spectacular chapters in the history of life on Earth. Let's see what you remember. The Jurassic was a time when our planet was transformed into a paradise of gigantic creatures that seemed to defy the rules of biology. The climate was warm and humid, which led to lush vegetation that supported massive herbivores like the Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus. What was the name of the massive plant-eating dinosaur with the long neck that grew over 40 feet tall? That's right, the Brachiosaurus. How about this guy? What's the name of this long-necked plant-eater that could grow up to 90 feet in length? The forests were also home to some unexpected residents, like the tiny feathered dinosaur Archaeopteryx, which was about the size of a crow and had long, bony tail and clawed wings. What was the name of this small feathered dinosaur that was able to fly? If you want to learn more about the dinosaurs, be sure to check out our other videos. Which fact surprised you the most? Did you know that the Brachiosaurus had a 4-chambered heart that weighed over 400 pounds? Or that the Diplodocus could grow up to 90 feet long? What about the tiny feathered dinosaur Archaeopteryx? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Of course, it was the Archaeopteryx. Right again, the Diplodocus. The oceans were filled with giant ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and other marine reptiles like the massive Leetsichthyes, a bony fish that reached lengths of over 50 feet. What was the name of this huge marine reptile that had enormous eyes, some over a foot in diameter, allowing it to hunt in the darkest depths of the ocean? The forests were home to towering conifers, ferns, cycads, and other exotic plants that created a primeval landscape that seems almost alien to us today. And moving through these primeval forests were the most magnificent creatures ever to walk the earth. But it was also a time of great change, with the continents drifting apart, volcanic activity increasing, and new patterns of ocean circulation and climate emerging. These changes would set the stage for the final act in the age of dinosaurs, the Cretaceous, period when life would reach its absolute peak of diversity and complexity, before being brought to an abrupt end by a catastrophe from space. The answer is ichthyosaur. But it wasn't just the size of the creatures that was impressive. The diversity of life during the Jurassic was breathtaking. But wait, there's more. The Jurassic was a time when the Earth was truly a paradise of giants, a world of staggering beauty and abundance that has never been seen since. We hope you enjoyed learning about the golden age of giants. You might think that the biggest, fiercest, most impressive dinosaurs roamed the Earth during the Jurassic, stomping around in a primeval world of towering redwoods and endless swamps. You've probably pictured the classic Jurassic landscape as something like this: dark, dank, gloomy, wet, full of creepy crawlies. Well, you're partly right. This was certainly true for much of the Jurassic. But by the end of the period, dramatic changes were underway that would set the stage for a golden age of dinosaurs. By the Cretaceous, insects had evolved wings, enabling them to move from plant to plant with ease and carry pollen with them. Flowers, in turn, began to offer insects nectar and pollen as a reward for pollination. Spinosaurus, the largest of the spinosaurs, was a semi-aquatic hunter with a long, narrow snout, conical teeth, and powerful jaws. Like today's pelicans and herons, it used its beak to catch fish, snapping them up with lightning-fast precision. Its paddle-like hands and webbed feet enabled it to steer and maneuver with ease through the water, while its long tail provided propulsion. This coevolutionary dance between flowering plants and insects would transform terrestrial ecosystems forever, from the colossal predators to the bizarre ornithomimids, from the sophisticated flowering plants to the thriving insect communities. The late Cretaceous was a testament to the creative power of evolution. But this world of giants was about to come crashing down in a fiery apocalypse. Somewhere in the distant reaches of space, an asteroid the size of a mountain was hurtling toward Earth, carrying with it the seeds of destruction for the entire biosphere. But that's a story for another time. Recent fossil discoveries suggest that this partnership may have been even more sophisticated than previously thought. Plants may have actually produced their first fruits during the Cretaceous, offering a novel way to protect developing seeds and attract animals to eat them and disperse them elsewhere. This innovation would have a profound impact on the evolution of both plants and animals, opening up new possibilities for seed dispersal and providing a rich new source of food. So let's explore what life was really like in the strange and wonderful world of the late Cretaceous. 100 million years ago, when dinosaurs reached their peak. In these vibrant ecosystems moved dinosaurs of unprecedented diversity and specialization. The ornithomimids, or ostrich dinosaurs, were among the most bizarre of these late Cretaceous herbivores. With their long necks and legs, small heads, and tiny arms. These dinosaurs looked like a strange cross between a camel and a flamingo. They grazed on vegetation, using their long necks to reach high into the trees and their strong legs to flee from predators. Among the most iconic late Cretaceous dinosaurs were the tyrannosaurs, a group that included the infamous Tyrannosaurus rex. But T-Rex wasn't the only tyrannosaur. Albertosaurus, with its smaller head and more robust limbs, was likely better adapted for hunting in dense undergrowth. Gorgosaurus, with its distinctive crest, may have used display to attract mates or intimidate rivals. But no matter how they differed, all the tyrannosaurs shared a common ancestry that set them apart from other meat-eaters of their day. These were advanced theropods with sophisticated senses, excellent vision, a keen sense of smell, and possibly even feathers. They were not just mindless killing machines, but highly efficient predators with complex behaviors and hunting strategies. The Cretaceous was a time of profound transformation for our planet. Sea levels reached their highest point in Earth's history, inundating vast areas of what are now North America and Europe with warm, shallow seas. Palm trees grew in Alaska, and Antarctica sported more trees than shrubs. There were no ice caps anywhere on the planet. And the climate was so mild that crocodiles and turtles thrived in the frigid waters of the Arctic Ocean. But the most momentous development of the Cretaceous was happening below the waves. For much of the Mesozoic, the oceans had been the exclusive domain of the marine reptiles. Sharks, bony fish, and invertebrates swam freely in the Cretaceous seas. But life on land was just beginning to explode in a riot of color and complexity. The Cretaceous saw the emergence of the angiosperms, or flowering plants. These weren't the same as today's roses and rhododendrons, but they were the ancestors of all the flower plants that we see around us today. Their arrival marked the beginning of a revolution in terrestrial ecosystems. At first, the angiosperms were small, insignificant herbs that grew in disturbed habitats along riverbanks and in forest clearings. But they possessed a new and powerful adaptation: flowers. Now, these weren't the showy, fragrant blossoms of today, but simple structures that concealed the reproductive organs of these primitive plants. This innovation allowed them to reproduce more quickly, efficiently, and widely than any other plants of their time. Moreover, they had the potential to form complex relationships with animals in ways that had never been possible before. Meanwhile, the insects were undergoing their own evolutionary revolution. As the Cretaceous progressed, the rainforests became denser and more diverse, forming intricate webs of relationships between plants and animals. But if the tyrannosaurs represented the peak of terrestrial predator evolution, then the spinosaurids were the pinnacle of aquatic adaptation. As the Cretaceous drew to a close, the world of the dinosaurs was a symphony of gigantism, specialization, and interdependence. In the smoldering aftermath of the asteroid's devastation, our planet lay broken. The mighty dinosaurs, rulers of Earth for 165 million years, had vanished in what seemed like an instant. But life, as we've learned throughout this incredible journey, has an extraordinary talent for resurrection. From the ashes of the Cretaceous world, small furry survivors emerged from their underground sanctuaries. These were the mammals, our ancestors, who had lived in the shadows of giants for so long. A bipedal primate in Africa began asking questions about the world around it. This species, Homo sapiens, would eventually gaze up at the stars and wonder about their place in the cosmos. They would dig into ancient rocks and discover the fossilized remains of creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years before their existence. Suddenly, they found themselves inheritors of an empty world. It reminds us that change is the only constant, that adaptation is the key to survival, and that the most unlikely creatures can inherit the earth when conditions shift. The mammals that cowered in the shadows of dinosaurs became the dominant large animals of today. The small, feathered dinosaurs that survived the asteroid impact now outnumber all other bird species combined. Perhaps most importantly, this epic tale teaches us about the incredible value of diversity. Every mass extinction eliminated not just individual species, but entire ways of life that had taken millions of years to evolve. The bizarre creatures of the Cambrian, the giants of the Carboniferous. The marine reptiles of the Jurassic each represents evolutionary experiments that will never be repeated. Every breath you take contains oxygen produced by cyanobacteria that began their work in the Precambrian seas. From the first self-replicating molecules in primordial seas to the emergence of consciousness in human brains, our planet has been an engine of innovation for billions of years. We are not separate from this process. We are its most recent and perhaps most remarkable achievement. The story continues with us. Every choice we make, every species we protect or allow to disappear, every innovation we create adds new chapters to this ongoing epic. We have become Earth's memory, the first species capable of understanding our planet's deep history and using that knowledge to shape its future. So the next time you hold a seashell, remember that you're retouching the legacy of creatures that lived when the continents were arranged differently under alien skies. When you see a bird take flight, know that you're witnessing the continuation of a story that began in the Jurassic forests. When you breathe deeply, realize that you're participating in an atmospheric cycle that has been operating for over 2 billion years. We are not just observers of Earth's history, we are its latest chapter, and perhaps its most important one. The future of our planet's incredible story now rests in our hands. What will we write next? The calcium in your bones was forged in the shells of ancient marine creatures. For the first time, a single species sees us has the power to influence the entire planet's climate, atmosphere, and biodiversity. We are experiencing what many scientists believe is the 6th mass extinction. But unlike the previous 5, this one is being driven by biological, not geological or astronomical forces. The very atoms in your body were scattered across the universe by dying stars and reassembled into the complex molecules that make you uniquely you. Picture them cautiously venturing into landscapes that had been forbidden territories just years before, where massive sauropods once thundered and fearsome tyrannosaurs prowled. 5 major mass extinctions have punctuated Earth's history, each one appearing to spell doom for life on our planet. Yet each time, life found a way to not just survive, but to innovate, diversify, and ultimately thrive in ways more spectacular than before. The Ediacaran creatures that drifted in ancient seas seem alien to us now, but they were experimenting with the basic blueprint of complex life. The Cambrian explosion taught us that evolution can move with breathtaking speed when conditions are right. The Great Dying at the end of the Permian showed us that even the most successful ecosystems can collapse, but also that recovery is possible. The mammals didn't waste their opportunity. Within just a few million years, a blink of an eye, in geological terms, they exploded into every ecological niche the dinosaurs had vacated. Some grew enormous, like the rhinoceros-sized Eunotherium. Others took to the trees, becoming our primate ancestors. They partnered with insects, birds and mammals in an intricate dance of coevolution that painted our planet in the vibrant colors we know today. Forests of oak, maple, and pine replaced the strange coniferous woodlands of the Mesozoic. Grasslands spread across continents, eventually giving rise to the great herds of mammals that would dominate the Cenozoic era. Some even returned to the seas, evolving into the whales that grace our oceans today. But the dinosaurs didn't truly disappear. Every morning, as birds sing outside your window, you're listening to the direct descendants of Tyrannosaurus rex. These feathered survivors carry within their hollow bones and efficient lungs the legacy of the most successful group of animals our planet has ever known. When you watch an eagle soar or a hummingbird hover, you're witnessing 230 million years of evolutionary perfection in action. The flowering plants that had begun their revolution in the Cretaceous became the foundation of our modern world. And then, just 300,000 years ago, then a second. If Earth's history were compressed into a single day, something unprecedented happened. We are the inheritors of this incredible 600 million year saga. This journey through deep time reveals a profound truth. Life is simultaneously fragile and remarkably resilient. We stand today at another critical juncture in Earth's history. The story of Earth's deep past offers us both warning and hope. As we face our own uncertain future, we can draw inspiration from the resilience of life itself.